Christy Lambert is the CEO of Contagious Influence and Lambert Coaching. She is the leadership and personal development coach with more than 15 years of sales and marketing experience with Fortune 500 companies. She specializes in helping businesses and sales teams increase emotional intelligence, leading to more effective leadership, followership, teamwork, and sales performance. Christy is a master certified coach. She's the author of the best-selling book Radical Abundance and speaks to a wide variety of groups on the power of contagious influence, our topic today. Most recently, she was a featured speaker at the Women in Business Expo and the Washington State Chamber of Commerce Executives. She obtained a BA in Communications from Washington State University. Let's welcome Christy.
Good morning. So how many other Cougars do we have here in the room? Any? WSU Cougars do we have in the room here? Go Cougs. Just one other one? Wow, that's not normal for here on the eastern central part of the state. So yes, I went to WSU, loved it there. It was the most fun 4 years of my life. I also learned some things while I was there, so that's a good thing. Today we're going to be talking about influence. But before we talk about influence, I always think it's good to kind of set a general framework for what is influence. Why is it important? Why does it even matter to have a conversation about influence? So I'd love to get some perspective from you guys on when you hear the word influence, what's the first word that pops into your mind? Leadership. Yep, that's a great word.
Sphere of.
Okay, I like it. Sphere of, so kind of thinking about like what's that area that we're influencing?
Mentoring.
Mentoring, that's a beautiful word. Yep. Let's maybe do one or two more.
Go Mike.
When you think of the word influence, first thing that pops into your mind? Example. Beautiful. Yeah. So for me, when I think about influence, what I'm talking about today is our ability to inspire others to action. And I think that's really important. And I use the word inspire intentionally. A lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today is the difference between full cooperation and forced cooperation. I think a lot of times when we think about influence in the context of a organization or in the context of sales, it's easy to kind of think of it as these old school, like always be closing, can you make people do things? I'm not interested in trying to help you guys make anybody do anything because I don't think that serves your best interest as a business person, and it certainly doesn't serve the best interests of our clients. But the ability to inspire others to act because they genuinely want to is a critical skill for almost anybody in any type of business. I know we were just talking about the challenge of recruiting teachers. There's an opportunity right there where we're talking about influence. And certainly if you influence somebody to move to the Tri-Cities to educate children, you want to make sure they're there because they want to be there in terms of an aligned goal. So that's just kind of some context in terms of when I say influence, what does that mean, what we're actually talking about today? I think it's important to give you guys some perspective on how did I shape my views on influence, how did I learn about influence and what I'm going to talk with you guys about today. There's two real core buckets where I learned about influence. The first is in my sales career. So I spent over 15 years in sales for Fortune 500 companies, biotech startup companies in the medical realm, where my entire job was to influence people to use certain products for their patients. So from a professional standpoint, I learned a lot about sales. What's interesting about that is I was always very successful in my career, but I didn't do it the way that I was taught to do it from a sales standpoint. So something that always stood out to a lot of my peers, my mentors, my managers is they're like, wow, you're really good at your job, but you don't follow this formula that we teach in sales. And so it got me thinking a lot about what was that? What were those things that I was doing that led me to be successful? The second thing that has really shaped my views around influence is horses. So a lot of the work that I do, I use horses for biofeedback in terms of leadership training, leadership development. And one of the things that's great about horses is they are naturally herd animals, and in their natural herd, they have a matriarch mare who will set the direction for the entire herd, kind of set where we're gonna eat, where we're gonna drink water, where we're gonna hang out. But they are more than happy to give us that leadership role if we are coming from a very aligned standpoint and that it serves the best interest of the herd. So we're going to talk today a lot about what those characteristics are that the horses are looking for, because they will only be influenced if it's in their best interest, because they are also prey animals. So their number one goal is survival. And if they don't trust that you're going to keep them safe, they're going to just move away from you and not spend time with you and not be interested in letting you lead. If they feel like that you are best suited to lead and can help keep them and the herd safe, they are more than happy to give you the leadership role. They don't have any ego invested in it the way humans do, so they're not like, oh, I don't want to cede that leadership role to you. They're happy to do it. They're like, hey, you're the best suited, go for it, right? So they've taught me a lot about what it means to influence. So one of the things that I think that helps as we're learning is to have a specific context. So a lot of times we talk about things like influence and leadership, and kind of is esoteric, right? It's this general theme. So I'd like to give you just a couple seconds to think about, in your world, who is it important for you to influence? Who are you influencing? And what is it that you want them to do? So just spend a couple minutes, think about that. And then I'm going to ask for a couple examples. So who wants to share who they are influencing and what you want them to do?
I would say, as far as the chamber, the business owners,
Okay.
and influencing them to be involved with the chamber one way or
Okay.
another. If they join the chamber or volunteer for us or part of the events,
Okay.
just to be involved.
So business owners to be involved in the chamber. Beautiful. Awesome. What's a couple other examples?
Well, I will. I'm influencing my teams or my staff, and what I want them to do is to work together as a team,
Okay.
following our set policies and procedures and helping the individuals they serve to influencing them to be
Yeah.
independent.
Okay. To basically be effective in their jobs and to do it within the structure that you have in place for them and be self-sufficient. Does that sound about right?
Sounds good.
Awesome. How about one more example or one more area where you guys are influencing? Your kids? That's a great one. Kids are actually master influencers too, right? If you think about their ability to influence their parents, they're doing it in their environment and the world around them and their peers. They are more than willing to assert their influence whenever possible. And then as a parent, right, you also have things that you want to influence your kids to do. So do you have an example of something recently that you've wanted to influence your kids to do?
Oh gosh, there's so much. I guess I've never been one to let them have a lot of chores or anything like that. So I've been influencing them slowly with giving them tasks
Okay.
and trying to just learn to. No one ever wants to clean up after themselves, but to influence them as they go is easier than
Yeah.
when you pile it all in, I guess, would be the most recent.
So to learn how to kind of pick up after themselves, stay on top of it so it doesn't become overwhelming and a big mess. That's a beautiful one. So when we talk, or when I talk about influence, I think it's important to understand, Paul, to your point, right, these spheres of influences. I think we've all heard that term. I kind of think of it as more kind of our core circles of influence, and not just in terms of, we think about it oftentimes in terms of our network and then who our network can influence. But really, there's three key areas that we have the ability to influence at any given moment. So in this moment right now, the first place where I can influence is myself. And we're going to talk about that. I think this one often gets missed. We're very focused on the other two, and especially the second one we're going to talk about, that we forget to take the time to actually check in with ourselves, to get clear with ourselves, and to influence ourselves toward the goal we're trying to accomplish. To have very effective influence on a consistent basis, it's critically important that the self is the first part where you put your attention in terms of influence. Because if you're not balanced, if you're not clear, it's going to make it really hard to influence these other areas. So if you're also running into roadblocks and you're getting stuck, the first thing I would encourage you to do is check in with yourself. Where am I out of balance? Where am I not clear? How can I influence myself around this goal first, and then to step back and look at these other two. So the second one, and we focus on this quite a bit, is others. I think teams, kids, business owners, right? So others is definitely kind of, when we think of influence, that's the number one thing we think about is other people. And that certainly is a critical place where we are going to be influencing. But I actually want to pull you back a little bit from that and get you more focused on yourself, and then also thinking about the environment, because those are the two areas of influence that we often overlook. So even right now, this environment that we're in is shaping the context and the tone of the conversation that we're having. And oftentimes, if you're in an area and you're trying to influence somebody and there's a lot of distraction, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of heightened energy even, and anxiety in the room, or there's a lot of confusion in the room, and you don't take the time to address that because I'm so focused on trying to get you to do something, it actually makes it, again, much more difficult to accomplish the goal of influencing others. So just something to keep in mind as we move through all of our conversations around influence is there's each one of these areas we're going to talk about will you'll be able to apply to each one of these circles of influence. So we talked about kind of what we're trying to influence. Now we're going to talk about 5 key skills of influence, and this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our conversation. So the first is emotion management. So this is really, really important. This definitely has to do with influencing others. This definitely also speaks to that first circle of influence that we talked about, our ability to influence ourselves. The more you become a master at emotion management and self-influence, the easier it is for you to influence others. So if you don't take any other skills away from this, if you just focus on your ability to influence yourself through emotion management, you're going to be much more effective at your ability to influence others. The other skills we're going to talk about today are awareness, clarity, congruency, and accountability. So these are the buckets that we're going to spend our time in. So when we talk about emotion management, obviously the first thing that we think about is the self. So what is my ability to influence my own emotions? So have you ever walked into a room and maybe you had a really hard morning, right? You're running behind, the coffee machine was broken, you burned the toast, and you've got a really important meeting, but you're just feeling off your game. So how do you manage that? How do you get back to your state of groundedness and presence in that moment, even when you're not feeling good? And being able to take care of that first before going into the conversations will make you more effective. The other part when we talk about emotion management is our ability to manage the emotions of others. So emotions are contagious, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. There's a lot of research that shows if I come in and I have a heightened heart rate, for example, your heart rate will also increase. And so being able to understand what's happening with the emotions of everybody around you, and then being able to influence those, whether it's through understanding what that person needs in that moment, what that group needs in that moment, so that you can get everyone to a calm and centered place, will make it much more easier for you to influence others. And then the third is the environment. So because all of us together collectively, all of our emotions are actually setting the tone for what this room feels like right now. So I just want you guys, I'm going to do a little exercise to show the power of this. So right now, everyone seems like pretty mellow. It's early in the morning. There's a lot of coffee. But I want to just see if we can even change the environment, even just a little bit, by collectively taking some time to each check in with ourselves. So I'm going to ask everybody to just take 3 deep breaths and close your eyes. And with your eyes closed, I want you to start paying attention to the sensory details in this room. Notice what noises you hear. Notice the smells in the room. Notice any physical sensations. Can you feel the chair, your feet on the ground? Notice any taste in your mouth. And then open your eyes and notice what you see. And now I want you just to kind of notice, what do you notice about the environment and the energy of the room versus what it felt like before?
Feel more relaxed.
More relaxed, yeah. Feels quieter. Even though no one was really talking before, it's like,
Kind of like in the zone.
yeah, yeah. So collectively, we just influence the entire environment of the room. And think about the power of that when you're having a conversation with somebody and there's something important that you want to communicate. Is it easier to communicate it when it's this calm, quiet, relaxed, in the zone? Or is it easier to do it when it's heightened and people are really excited and there's a lot going on? Might depend on what the goal is, for sure. But individually and collectively, we have a tremendous ability through emotion management and checking in with ourselves first to influence the entire environment anywhere we're at. So fun practices, if you want to practice this, is to go into a Starbucks or a Roasters and notice what the energy is. And do this exercise that we just did with yourself. Get really calm, quiet. The best way to manage your emotions at any time is to get present. And that's what we just did by checking in with our 5 senses. And start to notice if the people's energy around you starts to change as well. So you can try this in any public place. You can try it at home with your kids. You can try it in the workplace. But it's kind of fun to practice with an experiment, right? What happens 9 out of 10 times as you're learning this skill is that you'll try it and you'll be like, nothing's happening right away. So then your energy is going to spike because you're attached to it. So the key is being able to hold it long enough that the environment has an opportunity to synchronize without getting caught up in that mental headspace of, is it working? Is it not working? I'm doing something wrong, right? We have all these self-judgments about it. But if you can just do it with a sense of curiosity and openness and hold it, and then you'll start to notice the ripple effect that it has. So these are kind of 2 key questions that you can kind of get a sense of where you're at currently on the spectrum of emotion management when it comes to influencing. So think about the example that you thought of, whether it's with your team, whether it's with your kids. When you're interacting with your kids, when you're interacting with your team, any given moment, do you know how you're feeling? That's the key first step. Do I know? Am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling frustrated? Am I feeling excited? Just by identifying that, you're already starting to influence yourself. And then the second thing to ask yourself is, can you allow emotions without being overtaken by them? So we're going to talk about this a little bit later when we talk about congruency. A lot of times when we think about this context of emotion management, we actually think of emotion suppression. Those are very different things. Right? And this is when we talk back about how emotions are contagious. A lot of the research will actually show that if you have a leader in a room whose heart rate is spiked, they're anxious about something, they're worried about something, they're angry about something, if that leader tries to suppress that emotion, so automatically everyone's heart rate will also go up when the leader's heart rate's up. If the leader tries to suppress that emotion, that amplifies the effect. So a lot of times as a leader, we're taught just put on a smiling face. People feel that incongruence, and we're going to talk about that. And actually is more stressful because they can sense that something's wrong, but they don't have clarity on what it is. So it creates confusion and it creates fear. So learning how to allow the emotion without being overtaken by it is a critical factor. And the first step to being able to do that is to know what you're feeling. If you can name it internally, you've already made a tremendous amount of progress in that. The reason why emotions are so important is because emotions are actually what drive action. So if we look about the 3 core parts of the brain, we have our reptilian brain, which is the fight or flight part of the brain, the first part of the brain to develop. It's all about survival. It's do I fight? Do I flee? Do I run? What's happening? The next part of the brain is the limbic brain. It's the part of the brain where emotions are housed, pleasure is housed, and motivation is housed. And then the third part is the neocortex. This is the most rational part of the brain. This is what's most highly valued in Western culture. We spend a lot of time up in this neocortex part of our brain, rational thinking, linear thinking, language. What's actually interesting is in studies where patients accidentally had their limbic brain severed for the rest of the brain, they lacked any motivation to do anything. So even though they still had all of their executive functioning and could think very clearly, they had no motivation to do anything and basically just never did anything. So if you want to inspire others to act, understanding that they're going to act, their behavior is going to be affected by their emotions is really important. So people who are fearful are going to behave very differently than people who are excited. And you can use that to your advantage. So what do I think is the emotion? Like if I want my team to be compliant and effective, if I'm going to think for myself, how would I need to feel? What emotion would I be feeling that would drive that in me? It might be confidence, right? Then how can I instill that emotion in my conversation with my teams? It'll make you much more effective at actually driving action. So we talked about this a little bit. The inner influences the outer. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this model, even though it's probably it's really important in the overall context of driving behavior. But we talked about this, that emotions are what drive actions, right? And our actions drive results. What's really important to know here is what causes an emotion for somebody. Typically, all of our emotions are triggered by a thought. So we think that emotions are triggered by a circumstance, right? I'm standing in front of you here at the West Richland Chamber of Commerce, so I feel excited. But that's actually not true. The circumstance of me standing here in front of you at the West Richland Chamber of Commerce will automatically trigger a thought for me. And that specific thought is going to dictate what emotion I feel. So if I am like, this is such a fun opportunity and a great group, and I love supporting my community, that's actually 3 thoughts. So that's my cluster of thoughts around that. That's going to be a very different emotion that I'm going to have than if I think, oh my God, I don't know any of these people. I wonder if they like me. I don't know what I'm doing here. Same circumstance, right? You can see where each one of those cluster of thoughts would be an appropriate cluster of thoughts given the circumstance, but create very different emotions. So once you identify the emotion that you're feeling, a good question to ask yourself is especially if it's an emotion that's not driving the behavior that you want, is what is the thought that's driving that emotion? Like, what is my thought about this circumstance? Oftentimes we get really confused about the difference between thoughts and circumstances. So the way that I think about it is that a circumstance can be proven in a court of law, right? So we could prove, right, like tangible, I'm here in this room right now at the West Richland Chamber of Commerce. My thought, I love working with business people, what a great community we have. You could probably find 500 people who have different thoughts on that, so I couldn't prove that in a court of law. So just really important that if you want to influence your behavior, if you want to influence other people's behavior, we spend a lot of time trying to change the circumstance, but if you can get clear on what your thoughts are or what the other people's thoughts are that you're trying to influence, you're going to be able to drive that emotion much more powerfully. I'm talking about emotion, that's kind of the most robust part of this conversation around influence because it's probably one of the most important from a foundation standpoint. So while that's still fresh, does anyone have any questions about that?
So is the leader suppressing the emotions sort of like the beach ball under the water kind of thing?
Yeah.
Like it's got to come up or it's going to come up in other ways.
Angry and I have a fake smile on, it's a different smile than if I have a real smile. And I might think that I'm fooling you, but you know. And I think that is one of the things culturally we've all been taught to be polite, to not hurt people's feelings. Humans are the only species of animals that suppress their emotions. And in doing so, we all kind of play this game with each other, like, I'm going to pretend that I don't know what's going on with you, and you're going to pretend that I don't know that you know what's going on with me. How many of you guys have had a conversation, whether it's with a leader, whether it's with a colleague, whether it's with a customer, and you're just like, everything about that just felt fake and false and uncomfortable. But on the surface, right, if you read it, if you just read the conversation, well, everyone said the right thing. It should have been great, but it wasn't. So like, that's what's happening when we suppress our emotions, is it leads us down that path where now I'm suppressing my emotions. You know something's wrong. You have no idea what that thing is. So your mind's trying to figure it out. And at the same time, you're also trying to play like, okay, we're playing this game. So now I have to play this game in this role. And that creates a lot of stress for everybody. Versus as a leader, is there an example that any of you guys have where you have had something happen at work that caused an emotion that you're like, I don't know how to handle this with my work colleagues? Should I say something? Should I not? Does anything pop to anything you feel comfortable sharing?
I'm just trying to think of one. Instance. I'm not sure what I should say or not say.
Well, and that's fine. So I'll give an example. I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm going to just use a classic example that happens in the business world all the time. Revenue's down, right? Revenue's down. And I'm a leader and I get my revenue reports and I'm like, crap, like this is not going to work. Like if we continue down this path, we're going to have to make some serious changes within the organization. So I just get our quarterly earnings and I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. And then 10 minutes later, I have a meeting with my staff, right? That's already been on the calendar. And I'm still processing. Like I haven't had time to put together a strategic plan. I have no idea what the direction is, but something's not right. So if I walk into that room and I'm like, hey, it's a great day, like everything's amazing, like people are gonna be like, okay, like that's weird, like I can tell something's off. Or I could say, you know, I have some information that I'm processing. I don't quite know what it looks like yet. I just want to put that out there in case I seem a little bit off, that I might be a little bit distracted right now. Right? So that's an example of, I'm not ready to have that conversation. It's not appropriate for me to have that conversation yet, but I don't have to ignore it completely either. Or I might just say, hey, you guys have, most of the time when those types of things are happening with an organization, people already know anyways. Like, hey, you guys might have heard some rumbling that sales aren't where they expected them to be. I want you to know that I'm aware of that and we're gonna address it at this time in the future, right? So we're so scared to be honest because we're so scared that we're gonna get a question somebody's not gonna know the answer to, that we're gonna look like we don't know what we're doing, that people are gonna freak out, that we tend to wanna suppress and hide that, when the truth is that honesty is what actually creates a sense of peace and congruency for people. So finding what can I share here that's appropriate, and it might just be a little tiny snippet, it's still enough that it releases that kind of sense of fakeness and falseness. How many of you have been in an organization as an employee and the leaders were acting like everything was okay, but everybody in the organization knew it wasn't? Has anyone ever had that experience? And how much stress does that cause for everyone in the organization? So my sense of that and my experience of that is that in those instances, we're not telling people that anything they don't already know. We're just giving voice to what they're feeling, which then actually allows them to trust themselves and trust you. And again, it doesn't mean you have to go into all of the specifics. Sometimes it's just a little bit to like, we normally have a sense when something's not quite right within ourselves, and then most of the time we're told that sense is wrong because people are trying to do the right thing. And it's not because people have bad intentions or they're trying to be inauthentic. It's just that that's what we're taught in terms of leadership, is just always put on a good face until you have a plan. And so I would brainstorm what would be all of the things that would be appropriate for me to share, both from a legal standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, from an employee morale standpoint. And you might come up with one teeny tiny thing you can share, but that one teeny tiny thing that you can share will set the foundation for building trust and increasing your ability to influence. Doesn't mean you have to tell them, oh my God, I'm so freaking out right now, right? So you don't have to bring the spectrum all the way the other way, but just so that you're not suppressing it. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. So I'm just gonna check time here. Okay. So we're going to kind of run through these. The second key thing in terms of leadership or influence is your awareness. You have to know what's happening around you, internally and with other people, if you want to influence others. Oftentimes we get so caught up on what we want to accomplish that we forget to actually check in with what's happening right now. So when we talk about horses are masters of this, they're highly attuned to what's happening in their environment at all times. They have to be, because if they're not, all of a sudden they're going to get attacked by a mountain lion, right, like out in the wild, and it's not going to go well for them. I'm just turn this off. So if you want to increase your ability to influence after emotion management, kind of that big context that we talked about, check in with your awareness. Are you aware of what's happening with yourself? Are you aware of what's happening with others? And are you aware of what's happening in the environment? So a great example of this, and this is like a example, I'm working with a client in a round pen with a horse. And I was really focused on what was happening with the client, and the horse was kind of like, and I'm like, what's going on with the horse? And I'm like, oh, there's a horse fly on its back, right? So you can make it be about something it's not, but I'm aware of what's happening in the environment. The environment is shaping what's happening with others and with myself. So just to take that quick couple minutes to check in what is actually happening in all three of these areas will significantly increase your ability to influence others. So when we talk about awareness, are you attuned to what's happening in your environment, or are you easily distracted? The more you are attuned to what's happening in your environment, the more effective you are going to be at influencing. And can you sense subtle changes in those around you? So if you're having a conversation with someone and they're totally engaged, and all of a sudden they kind of check out. Has anyone had that happen? The ability to sense that and then address that will significantly increase your ability to influence. The next bucket that we're going to talk about is clarity. Are you clear? Do you have a clear idea of what you want to influence? So we talked about that at the very beginning. What do you want to influence? Who do you want to influence? Before you go into an environment where you're trying to influence somebody else, take the time to get super, super clear on what that looks like specifically. What's the specific outcome that you'll know you were successful? Are you clear on what you want to create, and are you comfortable communicating that goal? Those are the two quick questions to ask around clarity, and bring those with you into all your conversations. Congruency, we've already talked about this a lot. So congruency is what's happening internally aligned with what's happening externally. I think this is the biggest area of opportunity within most of our corporate environments, is this congruency, and finding a way to kind of increase the level of congruency. So some questions that you can ask are, do your words and action match what's really happening underneath the surface? And then, do you do what you say? Are you congruent with that? I will tell you that is the single greatest lesson I've probably learned from the horses is the value of congruency with influence. A lot of times people think, oh, I'm going to go in and I'm going to work with this horse, and in order to get the horse to follow me and to influence this horse, I need to be confident. And they're terrified of horses. And so they walk in, they're like, I'm confident. The horse will have nothing to do with that person. As soon as the person voices, I'm nervous and I'm scared of horses, 9 out of 10 times that horse will come right over to the person and connect with them. As humans, we place a lot of value on certain emotions and certain experiences being better than others. And that's what causes a lot of that suppression. The more we can be congruent, the more we will build trust with other people. And I think that's so, so important. So again, continuing to ask the question, what can I share? Where can I be more congruent? And your level of influence will skyrocket. Accountability. Are you willing to hold yourself accountable? Are you willing to hold others accountable? And are you willing to hold the environment accountable a little bit? So that sounds kind of like a silly example, and I'll just use this morning, right? There's music on. I'm like, I assume they're going to turn the music off before we start talking, but I don't know that for certain. So I'm going to be accountable within myself to say, yes, that's something that's important, and accountable to other people and asking, and then also by doing that, influence the environment. Accountability is a really tricky thing for us as we're learning to increase our level of influence, because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. We don't know if we were clear. But without accountability, that we can't teach people how we want to influence them. They don't take us seriously. So do you follow through on what you ask for? It's as simple as that. I ask for something. Am I willing to follow through on it? And am I willing to keep asking until I get the desired result? I might change the way I ask, right? It's not about bulldozing, it's not about being a bully, but am I willing to stick with it until I figure it out? even if it means trying things different ways. So we talked about this before too. I just want to revisit this in terms of all of the our ability to influence. It's not just a singular thing. All of these things influence each other. The environment is constantly influencing others. Others are constantly influencing how you feel in your own clarity, your own congruency, depending on how they're responding. And you're constantly influencing the environment and others as well. Everything's always influencing each other. So the more clear you are, the more congruent you are, the more your ability to manage your emotions and follow through on what you ask for, the more you're going to be the one whose influence ultimately sets the tone and the direction of what you're trying to create. So that's kind of our quick talk today on influence. What questions do you guys have?
What was the name of the book again?
Which, oh, the one that I wrote?
Yes.
It's not about this. It's about this Radical Abundance. You can get it on Amazon.
Radical Abundance?
Yeah.
Oh, but it's not on this. Do you have anything?
On influence is one of my writing projects that I am working on right now. Yeah. My highlight for the summer is I just got back from a 7-day writing retreat in Taos, New Mexico. I'm like, I miss my 3 hours of writing time and my breakfast and lunch and dinner that someone made for me every day. Like, oh, this is amazing. Yeah, so there's something that's coming, but yeah. The Radical Abundance book is about relationship with money and prosperity. So if that's something that you're curious about, I highly recommend it. Questions about influence, about kind of what we talked about today, about any of the skills or circles of influence?
I have a question with the horses.
Yeah.
How do you work that? Do you do like teams or businesses, or how does that work?
So we have a lot of different structures, so anywhere from individuals who want to just increase their own personal presence and their own ability to influence others around them. We do individual sessions, and then we also do group sessions for up to 24 people. We can bring out a team, we can bring out a business, we can bring out an organization. What we do is we break, if the teams are bigger in terms of 24 people, we break them into 2 groups of 12. Each person individually has an opportunity to work one-on-one with the horse. What's really powerful about that for teams and organizations is you actually, as a team, you're watching the person's interaction with the horse. And you start to see that a lot of the behaviors that that person is bringing to your relationship with them aren't personal. They're their own patterns. So you will actually learn a lot. I think oftentimes people learn more by watching their colleagues than they do by their own experience, because they're not in the hot seat and they're not nervous. So you start to learn when, okay, I can actually see how that person shows up this way in the office, and this is the result that they get, and I see how that's happening in the office as well. And then we do some coaching around that to help, if it's not effective, if they could be more effective in their influence, to give them some tools around that. What's amazing for people to watch is that when the person shifts, how the horse responds to them shifts very quickly. And so you start to learn what's effective and what's not, but not from a standpoint of this person's wrong and this person's right. It's just, is it effective? And then we do some group herding exercises and some other things where you get to work together as a team.
Okay.
Yeah, great question.
So you were saying you had a lot of experience in sales,
Yes.
but not really, following the patterns. I feel that a similar story with me, but how do you relate that with what you presented today? Or can you give me
Yeah.
tips? of what you
I think exactly kind of all of these things that we were talking about is what made me successful. So probably the single greatest piece of sales advice I ever got was when I first started my career, and I had a manager, and he's like, what do you want to say to this customer? And I told him, he's like, say that. I'm like, but it doesn't sound pretty, it doesn't follow right, and that's that congruency piece and that clarity piece. That if I'm clear about what I want to say, and I communicate it while I'm also managing my emotions. So especially, a lot of times we have to have harder conversations with our customers, and that's where it's really important. Am I calm? Am I congruent? Am I managing my emotions here? And then am I being honest in that conversation? And also being honest about the product that we sell. I think a lot of times when in sales, we have a tendency to want to sugarcoat the maybe not so great parts of our product and really spend a lot of time on the valuable assets, which, you know, you want to have a balance of that. But what I have found to be very effective is being very straightforward about, these are the times where this product wouldn't work for you. This is why it's not the best in this situation. And here's where it will be really effective. It's that level of actually being able to voice what they already know so that they know that they can trust me. Yeah. Most of the time when we're influencing people, we're not influencing them with our words anyways. We're influencing them with our energy. And that's what this is really about, is the ability to manage our own energy through emotions so that we create an environment where people want to synchronize with us. And these 5 things are the things that help us to manage our own energy. So that's kind of the more woo-woo version of what I say in Cliff
Yeah,
Notes.
I think that's probably why it's always been natural for me. is
Yeah.
that I've always naturally kind of done that, I
Yeah.
suppose.
90% of what you guys think about me today had nothing to do with what was on the slides and the words that came out of my mouth. Which is just it's good to know, but how much time do we spend focused on this versus on all of those other things?
I think a lot of it really does revolve around the nonverbal,
Mm-hmm.
because just my impression is that you believe in what you're doing, you're very passionate, you were very enthusiastic,
Yeah.
which draws me in.
Yeah.
And then you started talking more, and
Yeah.
so it
Yeah.
does kind of create the presence.
Yeah. It's so cool, this work I do with the horses, people are like, what's like the secret hand motion? I'm like, okay, you will see people who have no horse experience who technically do everything wrong, and the horse is connected to them and totally synchronized with them because they are in this energy space and using what we just talked about, a lot of times unintentionally without knowing it. There are also times, and this is what's so interesting, when we do these workshops, 9 out of 10 times the people who struggle the most are people who have horse experience because they think they know what they're supposed to do, and they're so focused on the technical part that they lose all of the other stuff, and all of a sudden they feel like they're performing for this group of people, and they really struggle. And it's such a great example of the technical part is probably 10%. But we spend 90% of our effort when we want to influence trying to get that 10% right. And if we can switch that equation where we spend 90% of our effort and our focus on the 90% that matters and 10% on the technical, we'll have a lot more success. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to spend your morning with me. I really appreciated it, and I appreciated getting to know all of you guys a little bit better and see you guys. So thank you for being here this morning. Yeah.